A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining our second installment of our African Voices workshop series, Climate 101 and Taking Action. As Courtney said, my name is Aurélie. I'm Aurélie Kalenga. I'm the communications manager here at the African Climate Reality Project. At the moment, I'm standing in as an interim branch manager. I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but based at our head office in Johannesburg, where we are hosted by our parent company, Food and Trees for Africa. So we have a number of climate reality leaders on this call who know exactly the kind of work that we do, but for the benefit of those who don't know us very well, we are the Africa branch of the international organization Climate Reality Project, founded by former US Vice President Al Gore. And essentially we work with NGOs, we work with community-based organizations and activists across Africa to create resources and provide support to advance the climate justice movement with a solution-based perspective. So our two focus areas are public finance and climate literacy and awareness. And through these programs, we want to use education, mobilization, and advocacy to influence the relevant institutions to deal with the climate crisis, advancing climate justice objectives. So these workshops that we're having form part of the climate literacy and awareness campaign. And the goal here is to see increased climate literacy, particularly of indigenous and local knowledge practices, leading to more climate action and adaptation responses across Africa, particularly amongst groups with the least adaptive capacity. And we're aiming to achieve this by hosting and facilitating these kinds of workshops related to climate change, climate literacy and education, and adaptation action. So this is really to support each other with the knowledge and resources to train people in your communities, in your regions, and your countries to run adaptation projects so that together we can really build the Africa we want. And this is particularly important for us as Africans, because according to some surveys and studies, the average national climate literacy rate across the continent is between 28 and 35% compared to Europe and North America, where most countries over there are over 80%. And more alarming is that on average, the climate literacy rate amongst rural women on our continent is around 12% lower than men. So education has been proven to be an effective path to climate literacy in Africa. And this is why we launched the African Voices Workshop series to support the increase of climate literacy. We decided to run these 2-hour educational workshops every month between June and August. We invite various experts to speak on climate change 101 and adaptation policies. Last month, we had our very first installment, which was focused on food sovereignty. Today, we'll be looking at water security, and our last installment next month will focus on waste management. So today, we're excited to take you through the importance of water security and to provide you with some practical skills on how to test and save water with our expert today, who's Dr. Ferial Adam. She's a water justice activist. She's worked for various organizations, including EarthLife Africa and Greenpeace Africa, and she's currently the executive manager at WaterCAN. She's completed her PhD in citizen science and environmental justice in South Africa's water sector. So I'm very excited for that conversation. You'll see a bit later. Also, we've integrated an art session into the workshop. It will serve as an exercise to reflect and process emotions surrounding climate change through writing poetry, drawing, and sharing our lived experiences. And our community engagement coordinator, Zianda Nkumane, will take us through that session. But before we jump into all of that, it's important to first give you the basics of climate change through our Climate 101 presentation. And Courtney Morgan will lead the session. She's the campaigner here at ACRP. So back to you, Courtney.
Thanks, Aurélie. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen here. Cool. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to the African Voices Workshop. As Aurélie said, I'm Courtney Morgan, and I am the campaigner here at ACRP. Today, I'm going to give a Climate 101 presentation and also a how to take action presentation. Obviously, we know in the African context that climate change is real and already affecting us negatively. So it's really important to not only understand what climate change is, but really how we can be active citizens and be part of the solution. So let's start with the basics. Let's start with the definition of climate change. Climate change is the measured increase in global average temperatures, which is human-induced. That is a very basic understanding of what climate change is. We'll go into some of the detail around that. But it's very important to highlight quite a few terms in this definition. So for example, the fact that it is measured, which means that this change in our climate is based in science, and the definition comes out of scientific data over many, many decades of research. You also have the term global, which means that yes, different countries and different regions are heating at different rates, but this is in fact a global phenomenon. And then you've got average, which means that even though we have cold days, those of us in South Africa at the moment are quite cold, but that doesn't mean that we are not having climate change. The word average just means that the average temperature of the year has shown to be getting hotter. And of course, important to say that this is a human-induced change. Although a change in climate over millions of years is a natural phenomenon, humans have, scientists tell us that humans have accelerated this process. As you know, there are a few facts that you can talk about. So for example, we know that Southern Africa is a climate hotspot. Some of the regions are heating at double the global average. This means that if we do overshoot the 2-degree increase, parts of Africa will become unlivable. We also know that climate change is a feminist issue, and we know that women are 14% more likely to die in a climate event, and 80% of people who are displaced by the climate crisis are women. We also know that climate change is a threat multiplier, which essentially means that whatever issue a region is already experiencing, for example, hunger, this is multiplied and exacerbated by the climate crisis. In this space, there are a lot of terms that we often use that maybe are not fully understood, or there are misconceptions. So the first misconception that we talk about is the difference between climate and weather. So weather is firstly the state of the atmosphere at any particular place and time. So for example, the weather is that it's raining, it's cloudy in Johannesburg today. That is weather. Climate, on the other hand, is the weather conditions prevailing in an area over a long period of time. So this is about the weather pattern in a particular place. So the climate of Cameroon is tropical, for example. So it's really important to understand the difference, because then you understand that if you have a randomly very cold day, that doesn't take away from the fact that there's climate change. Another misconception that's in the space is the difference between global warming and climate change. And I think we've come to a point where a lot of people are using these terms interchangeably, but there is slight nuance there to the definitions of each one, right? So to clarify, global warming is the gradual increase of the Earth's surface temperature. So when we talk about temperature increase in the globe due to the greenhouse effect, that is global warming. Climate change is then the impact and the changes in our weather patterns that we see due to, among other things, global warming. So the temperatures are increasing, and therefore there are impacts, there are knock-on effects, there are changes in our environment, and that is climate change. And we'll explore some of those changes as we go on. Yeah, and then just before we get too deep into the definitions and the terms, I think it's really important to understand how we got here. So how did we get to the state of climate change? So the first thing to say is that climate change is a result of the burning of fossil fuels, which was accelerated during the Industrial Revolution with the invention of the coal-fired steam engine. So it was a move essentially from a human economy to machinery. So that means that instead of people producing goods, we moved to machinery producing goods in factories, which required energy, which required the burning of history of the fact that we have had different development pathways. So it's really important at this point to remember that. Sorry, can everyone still hear me?
Yes, Courts, we lost you for a few seconds, but you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. So just to emphasize that when we talk about the start of climate change and really the accelerated burning of fossil fuels, that was really what defined the development pathway and trajectory in the global north. We all know the global south was not doing that at that time. And then additionally, there are a few other things. As a result of increased development, there had to be increased urbanization, and this resulted in a lot of deforestation for both housing, but also massive commercial agriculture. And commercial agriculture also emits quite a lot of CO2. And the issue with deforestation, as many of you will know, is that not only are we, cutting down trees for development, but we're also removing our carbon sinks. Forests are what collect all the carbon that we emit, and we're destroying that, and we're destroying ecosystems by deforestation. So so just going back to the terms, another term we use all the time in the space is fossil fuels. And maybe it's something that we kind of just accept that everyone understands, but it's really important to know what fossil fuels are, so we know what processes contribute to emissions, right? So fossil fuels form when they're exposed to extreme heat and extreme pressure, and they become coal, or in some cases oil or gas, essentially stored in our earth and in our ocean beds. So that's essentially what a fossil fuel is. This is essentially concentrated carbon, which when you burn them for energy, we are then releasing that carbon that has been naturally stored by the Earth's natural processes. We're releasing it right back into the atmosphere and disrupting the carbon cycle and disrupting Earth's natural processes. Now, you might ask, or you might get asked by people who are not in the space, why is this a problem? Why are emissions a problem? What happens in the Earth system for us to result in climate change, and then the effects that it has on people? What is really happening there? So the first thing is the greenhouse effect, which is when greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide or methane, and important here to note that these exist in our atmosphere anyway, but if we, as I said, disrupt these cycles and emit too much of these greenhouse gases, it creates a blanket around the Earth. The Earth already has an atmosphere that has a very delicate balance of allowing some of the sun's rays to come in and also allowing some of that heat to then be released out. But what humans have done, and when we emit greenhouse gases at the rate that we are creating a thick blanket around the Earth, which means that that energy that comes in is getting trapped in the atmosphere and is reflecting back onto the Earth, which is resulting in accelerated heating of our oceans as well as our land masses. And this is essentially what the greenhouse effect is. So then you have changes in the Earth system as a result of that heating. And there are a couple of indicators in the below image that will tell you, of course, that there is heating taking place. For example, sea ice is melting, so you have less ice in the oceans. You have sea surface temperature increasing, you have biodiversity loss, and all of these things can be explained with other knock-on effects. So you might say, why does it matter if the sea surface temperature is hotter? But you have all of these pressure systems, so your storms and your cyclones are formed over oceans. And so if that water and that air is hotter, the intensity of these storms increases, and that's has been demonstrated across Africa, especially over the last couple of years. You also have biodiversity loss due to, plants and animals not being able to adjust to heating, adjust to climates that are changing. And they aren't able to evolve and adapt as they have over millions of years. And so you have a lot of biodiversity loss as well. So those are essentially the basic terms and concepts you need to know about climate change. But some of you may be asking, and it's something that we've really moved towards in the climate space, is, okay, so we know climate change is a thing. We know scientists have told us, but what do we do about this? And I think it's clear, everyone, in this meeting, that we need action. And here at ACRP, we really believe in action through education. So it's really about, yes, sharing knowledge and experience, but what do you do with that information that you have just learned? And there are a number of actions that can be taken globally, nationally, at the systems level, or at the individual level. And we'll cover some of that now, but first, again, we need to understand the terms associated with what we call climate action. So firstly, you have mitigation, and mitigation refers to efforts to reduce or prevent emissions of greenhouse gases. So that is fundamentally about trying to address the cause of the climate crisis, so to stop emissions and to stop climate change. The biggest example of mitigation is the move from fossil fuel to renewable energy. Secondly, you have adaptation, and this can be defined as adjustments to a system to reduce vulnerability to climate change. So this is about now the impact. As we know, climate change is already here, and this is about dealing with the impacts that we are already feeling. So for example, climate-induced droughts or flooding. There are ways to adapt our behavior and adjust infrastructure to deal with the effects that we're already having. So for example, planting resilient foods in a small-scale community garden can help adapt to drought and other impacts of climate change, especially in the African context. So to recap, mitigation is about the cause, adaptation is about impact. And then something you may have heard a lot recently is this term loss and damage. Loss and damage is something that has really been spoken about quite a lot since COP27, but really for decades before that by the Global South. And it's really something that we are calling for and we really need in the Global South. So loss and damage is essentially the impact of climate-related stresses that occur despite efforts to reduce greenhouse gases and adapt to climate change. So this is in cases or events where adaptation and mitigation have not resulted in reducing vulnerability. So the Global South is really calling for loss and damage financing, because there are cases already taking place that have resulted in a loss of life and a damage to infrastructure and would have benefited from immediate relief, right? So for example, the image on the left is KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and the image on the left, on the right, is Pakistan, both rocked by really, really intense flooding, which really are examples of loss and damage events that could have benefited from loss and damage financing. There are also more recent examples across our continent. And then, more to do with the terms, there you may hear going forward, because this is really what we put emphasis on at ACRP, is both of these terms related to justice. So the first one is a just transition. And this is a term that actually comes out of unions, and it describes a shift from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy, with emphasis on nobody left behind. And what this means is that justice is at the center of this transition, and it calls for the protection of workers, right? So the second one is then climate justice, what we speak about ACRP, and is kind of the thread that we use to bring all of our campaigns together. And this is essentially a concept that outlines that those who are affected first and most severely by climate change are least responsible for the crisis. If you put this into our context, we know that that Africa has had the least contribution to climate change globally, but we are already feeling the effects most severely. And essentially what climate justice says is that the impacts of climate change and the burden of mitigation, so the impacts that come from mitigating climate change, so the shift from fossil fuels to renewables, for example, that burden must also not fall on the most vulnerable. So we know that even in the decommissioning of mines, for example, we have to protect communities and we have to protect workers in that transition. So just to go back to the actual emissions, we know that although I spoke about the Industrial Revolution as kind of being the beginning of our rise in emissions, we know that emissions have not stopped. In fact, we have been increasing drastically since 1850. But when explaining this to people, it's important what kind of visual you use, what kind of representation of these emissions you use, right? So these are two visuals that really explain why we call climate change a justice issue. So on the left is worldwide annual CO2 emissions. And as you can see, we've had a sharp increase, and that's just global. So that's all the emissions that everyone emits, okay? Whereas on the right, you have a map. And although it's giving you the exact same information, it is telling you a completely different story. It tells you the annual global emissions, but now it paints the picture of who has been emitting the most. And as you can see, it has not been Africa. South Africa has had a significant contribution to that. But overall, Africa has not been emitting the most. Yet, as I said, we are experiencing the most severe impacts. So just to remember that when you present information, it's really important to tell a true story of what's happening. I won't go into it now in this presentation, but if you do go to this link, you are able to, on the graph, overlay different countries. So for example, you can add America, you can add China, you can add South Africa, and you can maybe even add your own country and see, compared to the global emissions rate, what your own country's emissions rates have been. We don't have time for that in this webinar, but you're welcome to go to that link. It's freely available. So as I said, when communicating the crisis, it's really important and we really see building capacity about climate change and talking about the crisis as a necessary action. And really in the African context especially, this is how we speak about issues on the ground. We have to explain climate change in what we call bread and butter issues. So it's important to highlight that climate change does not only affect our environment, and this is why we call ourselves climate justice activists and justice workers, right? We don't only care about the environment, we care about the socioeconomic issues and how it affects people on the ground. So for example, climate change causes food price increases. If the climate is changing and the rains are not coming like they used to, this has an impact on subsistence farmers who now can no longer feed their families and their communities with the same methods that have been used for generations. They have to adapt and they have to change the way they grow because the climate is changing. But also on a globally, on a mass scale, we know that if there's widespread droughts, we know that crops are not going to grow like they used to. You aren't able to produce all of these things. So your basic food prices, such as maize meal, bread, all of these things also increase in price. But you also have other impacts that are really impactful on the ground. So there will be, for example, climate refugees and people who have to leave their homes and their regions because of climate change. We also know that there are entire island states that are in jeopardy due to sea level rise. These are all very real, very tangible changes in socioeconomic conditions due to climate change. And there's quite a few, and we can discuss some of them further, but those are kind of two that are really important. So another way that you can take action on climate, and this is really, really important to the African context. Another way that you can take action is by storytelling. For centuries, this is how we have kept our cultures and our traditions alive, through storytelling. We have a very rich history of oral tradition. And what we mean here is that we don't, although I've gone through, the definitions and all of that, you'll notice that we're not asking everyone to know the science. We're not asking everyone to understand the intricate details of the carbon cycle. But what we can do is tell a story. And this is where people will really relate to the crisis. Lived experience and grassroots sharing of stories of impact or of local activists will really help humanize the climate crisis and inspire people to know that they can make a difference. And these are kind of the things that you can do on an individual level. So for example, these are examples of some of our comrades who have worked across the continent, and all of their stories are similar in the fact that they have said that they experienced climate impact and they took action. So these are the things, talking about the crisis, telling stories, explaining it in ways that people can understand. These are things you can do on the individual level within your communities, in your schools, in your religious organizations, and require little to no resources to do so. But there are also some systemic changes that need institutional policy changes. So this is where we emphasize that no individual action is going to solve climate change unless it is paired with policy change. So we are not putting the burden of ending the climate crisis on communities and on people, but rather we have a responsibility to act and to use our individual power at the systemic level. And I'm not going to go through all of it because we all have different contexts, but globally, there are a couple of important institutions that you need to take note of, and that you can kind of think about and monitor to really monitor what's going on in the climate space. So firstly, of course, the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a body of the UN, and their goal is essentially to expand knowledge around climate change. So they are essentially what you can call the research wing, and they release reports every year, and that usually guide our actions. So for example, when we talk about the 1.5 degree scenario, this comes out of an IPCC report. Then, of course, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and these are essentially universal goals to address multiple crises that we see. So, for example, under the SDGs, you have calls for gender equality, better education, and climate change is just one of these things. Noting that climate change is a part of a poly crisis, if you can put it that way. And climate change is number 13 of the SDG. They were adopted in 2015 and essentially have the goal of 2030 to address these crises. And of course, we are very far off and very close to 2030. You then have the G20. So this is a group of 20 economies, which are the largest economies in the world. And this is essentially the premier forum for international economic cooperation. So it plays an important role in shaping and strengthening partnerships. And obviously, of course, it's got its issues, and we don't always have faith in these processes. But what's important about the G20 is that there's a specific working group on climate change and economic implications. Now, why I bring this up in our context is that South Africa is a member, and we're sitting at a very important moment with the G20 at the moment, because next year the presidency will sit with Brazil under a leftist government, and then the following year in 2025, the presidency of the G20 will sit with South Africa. So it's really an important moment for two global South countries to perhaps to amplify some of the calls coming from the global South. And then lastly, you have the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is an international treaty that recognizes that there are universal needs, that there is a universal need to address climate change and reduce emissions, right? The parties of this treaty meet every year at what we call COP, which is the conference of the parties. And usually there are landmark agreements that come out of these meetings. So Paris Agreement, for example, that came out of a COP negotiation. I'm going to end there, but just to say that, you know, at ACRP, we take up a lot of different actions, and there's a lot that you can get involved in. So we do engagement work, we engage with decision makers where necessary, we have community discussions in town halls, we support adaptation projects such as gardens, we do protests when necessary. A big part of our work is storytelling. We do petitions, we do research, and these are all things that you can take up for yourself, but also get involved in these existing projects. And just to, at this point, say that, of course, I did speak about adaptation, and this is really the point of these workshops. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Ferial Adam, who's going to give us more detail on an adaptation method. Thank you. Ferial, over to you.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and good afternoon to everyone, wherever you may be. I hope you're having a beautiful Friday. I'm going to share my screen quickly. Just give me a second. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Ferial.
Cool. Okay. So I've kind of called my presentation Water in a Time of Climate Change. Some of you might have heard of the book Love in the Time of Cholera. But I'm calling mine Water in a Time of Climate Change. And and I'm so glad, thank you for the invite to speak today, because I think one of the things I've been finding quite frustrating, not frustrating, but a little bit of a challenge, is that when people talk about something about climate change and just transition, I'm not sure if you covered, I think you did cover that a little bit, but it tends to focus on energy and it tends to focus on fossil fuels. And I think that water is also an important part, and it's going to be impacted by climate change. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of the water-related issues, like what is scarcity, quality of water, of course, inequality and injustice of water issues, and then how climate change is going to add to the challenges we face. And then what we are doing, I'm from an organization called WaterCAN, and we're trying to build an activist citizen science network of people who will test water. So that's what I will give an example of what we've been doing and how we have been doing it. Sorry about my coughing. I may have a little bit of hay fever because of the air around me. So I do apologize in advance, but I hope that you'll be able to hear me fine. Okay, so in terms of water and water scarcity and access, it is predicted that by 2025, almost 230 million people in Africa will be facing water scarcity. So, I mean, I know that the one thing about climate change is that we sound like all doom and gloom, but I think it's important for us to understand why we need to act given the urgency of the issue. Because I'll just remind you that 2025 is literally 2 years away. Sorry, something's happened to my system. And we can expect up to 460 million people who will be living in water-stressed areas. Most of those would be children. This would, of course, result into increased food insecurity and poverty. And we have just 2 years before our water crisis is predicted to become a catastrophe. So we cannot afford to sit back and watch this happen. It's literally, we're trying to swim in flood waters, and that's going to be our challenge. But there are ways that we can work around it. So this is a big challenge in terms of Africa's water. The other challenge that we have, and this runs across the region, is we've got issues with scarcity. So we're in a water scarce region generally. But then the water that we do have is highly polluted. So we have very poor water quality in many areas, and it's linked to industrial waste or effluent, agricultural, mining, also fossil fuels. And then, of course, one of the big polluters that have come up in recent years is government itself. So, for example, in South Africa, our government is now one of the biggest polluters of our freshwater resources in the country. We know that in a lot of the countries we still practice a lot of farming, and there's small scale farmers as well, and the large scale farmers, the commercial farmers are using a lot of water, but also there's inadequate irrigation infrastructure. So they're basically abusing and using what they have. There's a lack of human, economic, and institutional capacities to manage our water resources sustainably. And what this does then is it opens the door to privatization. And I was in a talk a couple of weeks ago, and I was really quite frustrated because there was a person on the panel from Germany and telling South Africa that, your solution is to privatize. And I thought, how much of your water in Germany is privatized? Why would you push something like that here when you will not privatize in your own country? The other thing is, in the UK, privatization has totally destroyed their water. So I don't think it's always the best answer. And then, of course, natural disasters. I'm calling natural disasters because I'm not yet at the climate discussion, but natural disasters lead to an increase in pollution and a lack of resources. So you see it all the time. If there's an earthquake or, flood, anything like that, you could have pollution that's going into water, but then also people don't have access to water, which are all driving forces of the water crisis in sub-Saharan Africa. And we all have seen this. There's no country that's left untouched. In terms of water injustice, I think that it's absolutely appalling that we can talk about robots and artificial intelligence and cars that drive on their own, and recently it was cars that can fly. But we have 2 billion people who use a drinking water source contaminated with feces. And a lot of the people live in Africa. The contamination due to feces poses the greatest risk to our drinking water safety. And at least 829,000 people die from diarrhea related to unsafe drinking water, sanitation, and hand hygiene. And I can guarantee you that 829,000 are predominantly in developing countries. So countries of the South, whether it's South America, Asia, Africa. And, I know I'm speaking from a South African kind of experience, but I do think that across the continent, this does it will resonate with you. So, for example, in terms of water inequality, we know in South Africa that a lot of people do not have proper access to water. Just so you know, I'm sure even South Africans don't know this, but it's only about 46% of households have a running tap in their homes. So not all people have running taps in their homes. They then have communal taps, taps that are 200 meters away, and then some rely on rivers and streams. So when we experience climate shocks like droughts, extreme droughts, we're going into another El Nino, we're going to have a lot of dry areas again, quite hard hit each time it hits harder, is that the wealthier communities can drop a borehole and then they have water. While, poorer communities don't have that, they rely on tankers. And if you had followed the news in Hammanskraal, we had an outbreak of cholera, and some people believe it actually came from the tanks because they don't clean it properly. So you have this inequality of those who have water. So, and the other thing is, the next thing I talk about is that rich households use drinking water for swimming pools, while poor residents struggle to meet their basic needs. But it's not just that rich households use drinking water for swimming pools, is that the policy for recycling water in South Africa is very poor. And I think it's across the region again, where we use perfectly good drinking water to flush our toilets. And that shouldn't be the case. It's a waste. So there has been a study, and the study found that the inequality that we're experiencing generally across the countries is a bigger threat to water sustainability than either climate change or population growth in Africa. And so we have to deal with issues of inequality. It directly relates to everything else we're trying to do. In South Africa, one of the other challenges is water pollution. So I talked about scarcity, and then I'm talking about quality. And then when we talk about quality of water, we have to look at what is polluting our water. And locally, I can tell you, it's from mining, it's from farming, it's from residential areas, and then it's just infrastructure breakdown. So the pictures you see on the screen, on the left is an open sewer manhole that ran for about a year like that. On the green water, that is Hartepeersport Dam, because of the high levels of waste that's going in there. And then the bottom one is crystallization from acid mine drainage. So all of these things, and I'm sure in other parts of Africa, we'd have high levels of fertilizer because of farming or mining that affect our water resources. So as a country, even South Africa, we are not mindful of the water that we need to save. We are not going to have enough water supplies to meet our demand by 2025. And our basic river ecosystems are not in a healthy state. So 60% of that is threatened by climate change and human activities. One, we have control over. We can change our behavior. And 52% of our drinking water supply systems range from medium to critical risk. And I think if we look across again to other countries, and I'd love to hear other people's views and what's happening in other countries, I think that this is similar issues that we're facing wherever we may be. So this picture gives a good idea of the state of our rivers in South Africa. So this is a government website. So it's just a screenshot of the map. And basically, government is supposed to record the effluent that goes into rivers from wastewater treatment works in the country. A blue dot signifies excellent water, green is acceptable, yellow is poor, and red is bad. This shows that much of our wastewater treatment works is not working properly, and it's not just sewage. It's pharmaceutical waste, it's industrial waste, it's chemical waste. That's all spewing out into our rivers and streams because our wastewater treatment works are not operating properly. And then, of course, we have, I'm sure this is something I'd love to hear if you have these statistics in other countries as well. The amount of water that we lose. Now, we're a water scarce country. We get half the rainfall average than the rest of the world, right? I can imagine that in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, that's even worse. But we lose as a country almost 40% of good drinking water through leaks, through theft, through failure to build, to infrastructure. So it's a whole lot of things that are problematic. And it costs the country about 20.9 billion rand, which I think is about $1 billion. And all of that we can see every week, every day. News. This is like almost like how much more of a warning light does this country need, or this region need, to understand that our water is in trouble. We've got Sasol, a big company that's guilty of polluting, willingly, knowingly polluting. We had a big outbreak of cholera, not as bad as other countries in the region, but still, should any of us be having cholera in this day and age? We've had Johannesburg, a big city, supposedly an economic hub in the region, where many residential areas went without water for weeks and days and months. So it is an issue. I mean, we're getting to the point where even the national department are charging local government for failure to manage our sanitation. And that is something that is significant. So I do think that the newspaper articles are telling. I do think that this is the warning signs. Let us not wait to get to the point where we are with climate change to manage our water better. It's really scary. I'm sorry to be the scaremonger. And we know what's causing it. We know it's a range of issues. And this is not specific to any country in the world. All countries have this. There's lack of enforcement with regards to pollution. There's willing destruction of wetlands and building whatever you want and your estates and putting fertilizer and golf estates and all of that. There's poor maintenance. There's overuse. I mean, there's so many corporations that are just overusing. They're not supposed to use as much as they use. And there's climate change. There's local government failure. There's corruption. There's poor conservation. There's lack of knowledge, lack of information. All of that is affecting our water resource, and this is global. So when we talk about climate change, right, we need to know that the water cycle is part of our everyday lives. It is extremely important, but climate change may have dire consequences for everyday water access and will affect that cycle, and that's what I want to talk to a little bit now. So according to UNICEF, the change in climate is felt primarily through a change in water. And that for me was quite telling, because I didn't think of it that way. I've also been an energy campaigner previously, and that was my focus. But now when I read this, I thought, well, yeah, why didn't I think of this before? And that's because a change in a water cycle pattern results, it increases the lack of access to safe drinking water, especially for the more vulnerable communities of society. And this statistic is interesting, that 74% of natural disasters between 2001 and 2018 were water related. So droughts, floods, and with droughts and floods comes pollution. And the frequency and intensity will increase with climate change. I think that a child in anyone's mind should never go hungry or thirsty. But 450 million children live in areas of extremely high vulnerability. By 2040, 1 in 4 children will live in water vulnerable areas. In addition, with climate shocks, with climate change, these disasters, they destroy or could contaminate water supplies. And that results in diseases like cholera, typhoid, all the kinds of things we're seeing. The other thing that we have talked about previously was, in the late 80s, early 90s, people started talking about water wars between countries. And now we need to think about water wars and conflict within countries. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen. There's going to be competition for resources. So where you have a case in point, when Cape Town was experiencing day zero, there was a clear conflict between the middle class and upper middle class communities and the poorer communities in terms of access to water. In Kenya, you have Lake Turkana, which is drying up. Not only is it drying up, but it's also becoming more salty. You can't use that water for agriculture. You can't use that water for drinking, right? So then there's two things that have happened around that area in Kenya, Lake Turkana. One is it's forced people to migrate south. So you've got the climate movement of people. The second thing it's done is it's created conflict. So what has happened is there's conflict over the water, but there's conflict over food. And the conflict is between Kenya and Ethiopia. So we were there, I think about 10 years ago. So you can imagine how bad it must be now. And we were interviewing people from Kenya on what they were doing. They would go out and catch fish. And we had got to them at the end of their day. So it was like getting to sunset. And we were trying to interview them for a documentary we were doing. And the next thing we know, all of the people that were there were like about 10 or 12 fishermen or fisher folk. They got up and started leaving. And we were like, wait, we're not finished. And they said, but we are, because there are snipers across on the Ethiopian side that will shoot us, and then they come and they steal our food. That's a reality that's happening. So those things are happening. And then, of course, with the climate shocks, it doesn't give us time to recover. Climate change is not saying, okay, I will give you a flood here, and then the rest of the country will be fine. Or I'll just have a fire this week. No. The pictures I'm showing you was 1 week in South Africa. There was the floods in KZN on the left-hand side, and all eyes was on that. Why? Because a lot of middle-class families were affected, and the whole province was affected. So you had the floods in KZN, but in that same week, the second picture was floods in Western Cape, in an informal settlement in the Western Cape. The third picture, yes, is also KZN. The fourth one of a drying river was in the Eastern Cape. And, you know, the drought was intensifying at that time when it happened. We had the big flood last year. The bottom one is fires in the Western Cape. All of this happened in 1 week, right? So Courtney has spoken about loss and damage. Now you must think about it as not one event. You're talking about 4 different events in 4 different parts of the country. And that is the kind of things that developing countries are going through. I wanted to end my climate change section just with a little bit of relief, because I think it's too heavy, a lot of heavy discussions. And I do think that some people might, you know, think, oh, why are you making fun of the devil? But I do think it's funny because, you know, growing up, people say it's as hot as hell, or you are going to burn in hell, those kind of things. And this is making a joke about climate change. And it says, oh, what a relief. The heat waves on Earth were becoming unbearable. And that is something that we need to keep in mind. Europe in the last month, in the last 2 or 3 summers, have had the worst summers ever, and people are dying from it. So that is where we are in terms of water, the impacts, and how climate change is going to impact harder on our water. And that we need to do something as much as we can. And that is what we're trying to do. This is the part where the adaptation. So we need to be proactive in our actions. And these are activists that are in an organization called the Vaal Environmental Justice Alliance. And this is, we talk about activist citizen science, not just citizen science, which some of you may have heard of it. So what is citizen science? Citizen science is about ordinary people getting involved in science in whatever way or form or research. But generally what they've done is they'll get like ordinary people to count butterflies, to identify trees, identify birds. Then you take all of that data and you send it off to a scientist in a laboratory. I'm saying no, that is not the way we need to do it. We need to use the science as activists to promote our issues and to become monitors of the environment. And this is where we're looking at adaptation and preempting any kind of shock. So what we're doing is we work on water testing. And we have, I'm just giving an example here of what we look at, but we have very clear protocols. Like, why do you want to test the water? What makes you think that you need to test the water? Where are you testing? So we have a testing kit that you can use for all drinking water. So fresh water, so rivers, dams, your taps. We've also used our testing kit, by the way, on the beaches in South Africa to figure out if there are high levels of pollution there too. So it can be used. And we teach basic awareness, how to observe your environment. So it's not just about testing, but it's understanding and learning and watching the signs. Environment is talking to us. If you're there and there are dead animals, there are dead plants, there's a smell, there's a funny color, all of that is telling you something about your environment. If you go and you say, this looks funny, chances are something's up. Because we've been around a long time and we've been looking at rivers and streams and playing in them and having, fetching water from them. So we kind of know what they should be like. So if there's any change, we shouldn't think it's a once-off. That's our starting point of being aware of our environment, okay? So this, in a nutshell, is our testing kit. We have a few parameters, and I want to just share that with you one by one, if okay. We have in the bottles on the top, we look at, it's a bacterial test, and we test for coliform bacteria. If it's positive for coliform bacteria, it will turn black after 36 hours, but I was in a training yesterday with the South African Water Caucus, and it could also turn black within 24 hours. The other two is the petriform, which tests for E. coli. It takes 72 hours or 3 days. If there are spots, then that shows that there's definitely signs of E. coli and you cannot drink that water. We also then have a chemical side where we test for pH, alkalinity, chlorine, hardness. We test for nitrates and nitrites, and I'll explain a little bit more about these parameters in a second. And we test for phosphates. We have a metal kit that we don't use everywhere. We use it in areas where it's just close to mining. And it's really simple. So for the strips, for the chemical tests, you dip the strip in the water for 3 seconds, you take it out, you put it down, and you wait 3 minutes. That's it. You take it, compare the strip to the color chart that you provided with, and then you know what's happening with your results chemically. You look at phosphate. Why? So we've chosen a few parameters. Sorry, I can't see questions or chats, and if there's anything you're sending to me, maybe the facilitator can just alert me to something. If it's questions, we can do it after. In terms of the chemicals that we look at some of the key chemicals that even the standards, the World Health Standards of drinking water have stipulations. And so we within those guidelines. And so we chose some of them that would be useful. So like, for example, phosphate. You get phosphate from soap, from fertilizers, from industrial effluent, from sewage pipe leaks. So it tells you quite a lot, right? And we give you a chart that gives you exactly where the cutoff is for the phosphates. We have a 6-in-1, which looks at, why do you want to look at pH? So you have a pH for drinking water this says 7.8, I apologize. It's about 6.5 to 9, that it's safe. But you don't want to have too acidic water or too basic water. It's not safe. So you need to know that. For chlorine, in many cities, if you're getting city or municipal water, you would have chlorine. But If they're not cleaning the water properly and dosing it with high levels of chlorine, you could get a chemical formed which is part chlorine, which is from chlorine and water, and over time can be a cancer-causing agent. So you need to monitor that they're not dosing the water all the time with chlorine. And then you look at total hardness and alkalinity. Those you look in conjunction with others. You won't die from from water that's too hard, but it's good to know that this is what's happening. Yesterday, I did speak to someone who found that the water is very hard, high levels of lime and calcium, but it's been going on for so long that people are having problems with gallbladder stones and kidney stones, and that's a very real thing. Nitrates and nitrites are also important substances. Nitrates you get from sewage, fertilizer runoff, also urine, and if you have leaking sewage pipes, runoff from agriculture, large agriculture. You could have badly built pit toilets, animal waste, for example. All of that can pollute the river with nitrates. And then nitrates similarly, but the allowance for nitrates and nitrites is different. You can have a little bit more nitrates in your water to be safe, but nitrites, you need to keep it very low because it has a high risk. And this is what a color chart would look like. And you'd have the different numbers. Within the blue, that is safe. Outside of the blue, it's not safe. And where it has the 1 and the 10, that is now borderline. It's quite high. Then, of course, is the metals, which I mentioned to you. And this is, it looks at, it does a combination. So it's a combined detection. It doesn't do one of each of it. So it takes all of that, and then it does a calculation. So if you have anything above 400 parts per billion, for example, then it's a problem in terms of metals. So then I'll give you a summary of the readings. We do this training with school kids. We've done it with teachers. We've done it with activists. I just came back yesterday from East London, where people do the training and we take the testing kits and we give them samples to work with. Mashile is on the group. He was part of the training yesterday. Maybe he can talk about his own experience. But we always say that testing is the starting point. It is not the end point. So you test the water, this is the bacterial test, which I did talk about, and this is what it looks like. But you then upload all your data to a map that we've developed. This is the link. I can share the website if anyone's interested, but this is what it looks like for now. This is how many tests we've got so far. And you can see we have a concentration in Johannesburg, KZN. The East London one was yesterday, and then you got some in George and some in Cape Town. We need more people. We need people across, and if other regions want to join in, we can extend the map. It's not just around this, and we're happy to do that. So this is just an example of where the tests have been happening for now. So this is where I was getting to, is testing is the starting point. You've tested water, so what? What are you going to do with it? And we work through a whole program to say, okay, you've identified the problem, you've checked the water, you've got a few people together, you went out, you tested the water, it's bad. If it's just your tap, you need to consult with people around you. There's always WhatsApp groups, local citizens, groups, church groups, but you can connect and say, hey, my water was like this. What about yours? Whatever. So you can do that. Build the talk about the test that you do. If it comes up positive, or it comes out very bad in terms of the chemical side, or it's positive for bacteria, you have to tell your municipality immediately, because they need to stop people from drinking the water, right? They need to alert the people. You then also can, as your own organization, as your own climate, change representative, you can write to the media and say, we've tested the water. This is what we found. We think it's a problem. Someone needs to come and test this much more seriously. Build awareness in your area. This is about creating the water movement and water monitors we want to see across the region, not just here in South Africa, because our water's linked. We need to be able to work together on it. So build awareness. I mean, churches are great, temples, they're great places for creating awareness. Schools, sports groups, social media. We've got to be like incessant and do this all the time and create that campaign. We need to connect other groups, other organizations, work in your area, so work local, work province, work national, work other countries, right? We need to continue testing. Water is something that flows, and it could flow and it would have pollution, but then it would flow and it would be fine. It's what we are seeing along our coast. So we need to consistently test. I test this month, I'll test next month. Unless I test every 2 weeks, there's, but more frequently than just once. Once is not going to give you enough data. And then if there's no response, you need to build a public campaign. You need to have banners, posters. In some places, it's safe to protest. In some, it's not. Something new that we've done here in South Africa is we've laid criminal charges against the local municipal managers. Because they were in charge of our water, but now our water is polluted. They didn't do their job, so we must charge them for pollution, right? So then there's a tutorial where you can look at the whole process of how to test. I'm not going to go through that now, but I'm sorry, I was missing some pages. It's gone. But I want to share with you some examples of what people did where they tested. They found that the water was polluted. They then wrote to their municipality and they actually got the municipality to issue a boil water notice. The other thing that people did was they created, through testing, they got other people involved and formed a little group of people who were monitoring the water. So there are ways that this has practically happened. So I'm not talking, this is not only theoretical, this is not only theoretical. This we've got practical. These steps was not us sitting in a room and saying, okay, what do you think? What do you think? We followed what people were doing when they've tested, and this is what has worked so far. It can change. You may do something separate. You may have, I'm not saying you will test, but if you do, you might find something different. You might find that you work better with universities, and we'll have to put that in. So we're still trying to build this. This is a work in progress. Any information you give us, any advice would be great because we are learning. We don't know all the answers. There are people on the ground like Mashile who can advise us, and we are open to changing this accordingly. Thank you very much. If you need to get in touch with us, that's our website. On our website, you will find the Map My Water. You can have a look at the map. If you need to get in touch with me, I can leave my email in the chat. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Ferial. I think that was really, really helpful for our participants, and really, really helpful to provide us with practical steps that we can take to make sure that we are part of the solution. So I know that you spoke about, being doom and gloom with climate change, but it is difficult. It is a hard situation, but as long as we are, sorry, I'm also recovering from being a bit sick. But as long as we are following that up with solution-based action, that it's really, really great. So thank you for that. You're actually right on time. So we have about 15 minutes for questions, and there are quite a few, there's a few requests to get the presentation. As always, you will definitely get the Climate 101 presentation as well as Ferial's presentation with her permission. That will be sent out to everybody. You will also get a link to the recording of this webinar if you would like to share it. And then there was just one question about where can we get the water testing kits. But before I hand over to you to answer that one question, I'm going to open the floor. So if you do have any questions, we want to keep the space open. So please feel free to raise your hand. So if you have any questions to Ferial about the work that she does or some of the stuff that she spoke about, or to tell us a bit about your experience in your country, please feel free. We have about 15 minutes. So. Anybody?
Hello.
Hi, Ewi.
Hey, Courtney. I think that was really a beautiful presentation, and I would really love to have it after this event. So one thing about what she was saying was I picked the issue around the kids, which is something that is not very common around my space, especially working with rural communities. And I've been having a conversation with someone who is trying to work on issues around water in my community. And I thought this would be a great way to provide solutions to the people, not just getting information on what is actually happening, but providing solutions at the same time. And I don't know if in the long run or there could be a way to have like a training on how this kit is developed, and also if Ferial, I hope I'm not missing the name, Ferial is willing to extend her work in Cameroon so that we could have more communities reach and see how to solve the water issues in the country. For example, water really became a serious challenge in the past few years. And personally, I had to be like in my apartment for over a month without having running water. And I would have to go long distances to get water to take care of everything that I need to do at home. And then it happens now that when the water comes back and it starts flowing, it's really dirty. Sometimes you can see worms come out of the water, and it's so scary. You don't even know how to use it. Yes. So we need those solutions at great capacity in our communities. Sometimes, like, I don't drink water that runs from my taps at home. I have to buy all the water I drink, because the last time I realized I was in the hospital for typhoid because of the quality of water I was consuming. So now I spend so much money buying water to drink, while we have abundant water resources, lots of water catchment areas, lots of water running all over my community especially. And we cannot make use of this water because the resources are not there, the technology is not there, and the opportunities like what you're presenting now is not, we don't have the knowledge on some things like that. But if we do, we'll be able to provide better solutions and greater ones. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ewi. Maybe Ferial, we can set up a call afterwards for you and Ewi to kind of connect. Because I think it would be really great for us to kind of take this further. And thanks for sharing your experience, Ewi. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to hand over to Ferial. Okay, Smith. Let's take Smith's question, and then I'll hand back to Ferial to answer those two questions.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, just a quick one. Amazing presentation. So my question is this. I'm from Nigeria, and if you know Nigeria very well, you know it's we call it River State in Port Harcourt. You know we have a lot of. Can you hear me?
So yeah, there's a bit of static. We can hear you speaking, but there's static over what you're saying. It might be something that's plugged in.
Should I take it again?
No, that's perfect. Yeah. Continue.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm from Nigeria and I'm in the Nile Delta region, And where I am is Port Harcourt, River State. And if you know River State very well, you know we have a lot of river, whole lot of it, and we have a water situation as well. Most of the water here, the rivers are what we call salt water, like natural salt water. They have more of salt water than fresh water. So you talked about some of those testing toolkit. I think it's something that will be very, very beneficial to those in the communal areas. I don't know how those toolkits can come down to, communities in River State or Nigeria or other local areas, maybe through the traditional rulers, through community leads or so. Let's just, see how we can, get that. Even if we can't get that, maybe we can recommend that in some of town hall meetings we have, so that, yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Smith. Ferial?
Yes, thanks, Courtney. I have one question. You said two. I have the one of where can we get the kits, and what was the second question?
It was the question that Smith was asking. So same question, I guess.
Same question.
Yeah.
Okay. So to be honest, we've mostly used our kits in South Africa. We haven't sent the kits out in the region, and I think it depends on on demand, or how it would be very important to get it to people. So we just need to investigate what would be the most, if people are part of an NGO or organization who can get a sponsorship to help with the transport, the postage, or the sending it to you, that would be great, because we can get the kits out to you. The only thing we would want is we need to have a training. We need to get you registered onto our map, so that when you do get your results, you can share that results online, and that would be great.
Awesome. Cool. So
But
essentially,
they're not difficult to get. These kits are not difficult to get. We've worked with a specific laboratory to have bespoke kits made for us. But Courtney, as you said, I'm happy to have the chat offline as well to look at what would work best for the region.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll definitely chat about that, because I think it's something that can be used, and you can have another online training.
Yeah,
but
I'm happy to do an online
used.
training. I've done a few online trainings and they work nicely, so I'm happy to do that as well.
That's great. Cool. So Ferial has put her email address in the chat. So you are welcome to email her, but also if you would like to get in contact with her, feel free to email me, and I can make that connection. Yeah, are there any other questions or comments or sharing of experiences? Has anyone else done water testing in their countries? We have about 5 more minutes left, so feel free.
Can I say something before anyone else? Just a little bit. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that there are definite water challenges that may require different solutions. And it would be nice, Courtney, I assume you have contact with everyone here, to maybe just do like a survey, like a Google Doc or something, saying, what are your water challenges? I mean, Ewi's just, am I saying her name right? Because she was saying, she's saying my name right, Ewi. The thought of worms coming out of your water, your tap, is just, we've had cases like that in South Africa as well. So, it's just like those kind of things. What are key challenges? And I think Smith has mentioned his as well. So it would be nice to have, for the people who are on here, to get a sense of what are the water challenges, so that if we do another online kind of training, we speak specifically to those challenges.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So I'm glad that the previous questions have encouraged more people to raise their hands. So Lerato, you were first, and then Zianda, and then Nomfundo. So Lerato, please go ahead.
Afternoon, everyone. Apologies on actually joining late. I see I missed out so much, but family duties and commitments called. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really great. The little minutes I joined in, I learned so much. And I just want to say that as we are gathered here in this platform, I believe some of us, or I know most of us, are actually activists, and we also have our own network. So perhaps maybe like a suggestion also to Pharrell to say, now that we've learned this, we are aware of this, is it not possible that perhaps maybe we can maybe schedule another more intensive online meeting so that we can spread the knowledge out there within our community? Because I love the comments you just mentioned now, that we have different challenges, and I'm actually based on like at the south of Joburg, and water is a crisis everywhere. So even although your water may be healthy or safe to drink, but the water issue or the water crisis is vast in a sense of these water shortages. And once in a while, our water levels are just low, and there's just so much issues and problems. And when you take a look at the whole cholera outbreak, sometimes the water is brown, and you don't know. Sometimes the water has like a misty color to it, and sometimes you fear it. Sometimes they tell you they're cleaning it. Sometimes the water has some black dots, and you have no idea what is that. Yes, so I think it would be so great if perhaps maybe if we can have another intensive online training, just to broaden our knowledge more, even if it's over 2 days. And then we, those that join, if we could have access to maybe an online kit or worksheets or whatever, to then share it out with our organizations, and most importantly, our communities and our families, because I just know that we are so much in the dark with water, especially also since water is going to be scarce. People have said that the next world war will actually be with people fighting for water, and people are not saving water. There's water shortages, and people is still relaxed for now, because you know what, I can still go buy water. It's not my problem. I can still afford that. But there's gonna be a time where it's really, really gonna be hectic. So from this platform, if we can just up it a bit, I would really, really be happy. Yeah. So from my side, that's that. Thank you so much.
So I love that what Lerato has just said. I think that Courtney and the African Reality team, I think it would be nice for us to chat about how do we have a collaboration, firstly for the people outside of South Africa, but just for the people in South Africa. We are running for the next 2 months, we're running in like a lot of testing. So we want specifically, and we'll work out the details for people outside. So we're not excluding them. We're not excluding the countries outside of South Africa, but in the next 2 months, we're definitely trying to get South Africans to test more. We want to run testing from August continuously. We don't want people to do once off. We want to do it often, but also we're having a week of water testing around the 18th of September. And we'd love people to get involved in that campaign. So please take my email, tell me if you're interested, and we can collaborate with you guys, Courtney, to make it a campaign.
Yeah, definitely. Lerato, please get in contact with Ferial. But we'll also definitely put that on our socials. Zianda?
Hi. So for me, just a quick question. I don't know if I missed it during the presentation, but what then happens with the findings that you get for all these water testings in terms of, is it shared with the government? Like, what are the next steps, and, pushing forward towards more safer and I guess cleaner, water systems? Yeah.
Ferial,
Yeah, so that's...
Can we take a round and then I'll come back to you?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Nomfundo?
Hi, Courtney. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you so much, guys, for that lovely presentation. When you talk about water, I think you really touch a very sensitive topic. I have worked in the Department of Agriculture here in Durban. So working with small scale farmers, one of their major problem is water. Just being able to just irrigate their plants and just move around and make a means of water is a huge impact. But on a more personal level, where I stayed, I think for almost like 3 months, we didn't have any water. And it was hectic. It was so hectic where my mom had to use her car to fetch water from her school and back and forth. Luckily, in our advantage, we had a car and we had that access of water. but people, my neighboring people, didn't have that type of access, and it was really, really hard. Which actually, like, we were very prone to diseases and so forth. And where you saw that, oh my gosh, if this could carry on for a year, would be really in a very, very scary part. So the water issue is a big, big thing, and we need everyone to be hands on deck and really try to find solutions, and not just short-term solutions, but long-term solutions. Because honestly, yes, we can go buy water, but for how long are you're gonna keep on buying water? It can only sustain you for so long. And going back to how many people can afford to buy water at the store? And even if you are buying water at the store, you can only buy for a certain quantity, but you need to do a lot of things with water. Bathing, cooking, cleaning, just your day-to-day activities require water. And so when you are going to be buying water, you buy water mainly for just drinking. So when I see such things, when we have such conversations, I am really, really concerned that as the youth, we need to be hands on deck and try to find way forward to actually solve these issues. If I did not have that shortage of water, maybe I wouldn't even be here listening to this conversation. But that was a huge wake-up call for me. And I was just like, no way, this is not, it's not healthy, it's not good, it's not supposed to be like this. And I'm not only suffering alone, but there's like a huge lot of people in my community suffering. And how can we bridge the gap? How can we make sure that everyone is getting healthy water that they can consume? Yes, we did speak about things as mining and so forth, but I don't think that is the huge percentage that contributes to the water shortage that we are experiencing as South Africans. So I would really love to be part of just finding solutions in moving forward into how we can bridge the gap, how we can work around purifying water, and so forth. So thank you, ladies, for the presentations. I learned a lot, and yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Nomfundo. And another example of how lived experience inspires action. And that once you experience it and once you actually are confronted by challenges, that's when you know are able to take action. Sunny?
Yeah, so I know there's a lots of climate leaders from the rest of Africa. So greetings to everybody. It's always nice to see you guys on a call. But my question is directed at Ferial and rather selfishly about South Africa. So I would like to know, with the testing that Ferial and the team have already done, how much faith can we have in our local water authority, Rand Water in South Africa, in Johannesburg, South Africa, and how safe is our water to drink at this point in time? Thanks.
Thanks. Ferial, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Courtney. So in terms of Zianda's question on what we do with the results, I think, Zianda, one of the things we're doing is, so we have taken the results, and whoever's taken the tests in wherever they're living, we've worked with them to be the champions of those results. So we don't go in as an organization and take over their local lived problem, right? So for example, they would highlight the issues. If it's, like I said to you, if there's high levels of E. coli, and there was, at the end of my slides was this 12 steps. So it's alerting government, it's alerting local government, it's alerting the media, it's, you know, whether it's radio stations, newspapers, etc., that the water's polluted, and that you are calling for government to put into place actions to change. We then say, if they don't do it, you can go to national government to come and investigate, because we have something called the green scorpions and the blue scorpions, right? So it's quite a process. But also, like I said to you at the last end, is that if people are not changing, and if we find that local government or government's not listening, then we have to do the kind of things where you stand with banners, you stand with posters, you create more than just one person who's tested talking about water, where it becomes a community that's talking about water. And in South Africa, in many parts, often we find that it's when you don't have water delivery or access that it's easier to protest about. We need to change that to say it's also got to be about pollution. So that's the kind of things we're doing with the results. The results get uploaded to a map, but anyone that we work with can use that map in their own kind of campaign. So we're working on open source. So that's the thing in terms of the results itself. Last year, when we did the week of testing, we came out with a report, and we had some examples of how people took that forward in terms of whether they formed a group to challenge water, whether they challenged local government, whether they just started forming a river group that would go every week or every month and test. The importance of the testing, though, example is, for example, in KZN, when the government, KZN, by the way, is KwaZulu-Natal, it's on the coast. And when the government had open beaches last year, it was civil society organizations, some of which we were part of or we work with, that did the tests and found that actually the water is not safe to swim. So we are able to also hold government accountable. And it has been a powerful thing, because science and citizen science is the last thing they think activists have. So it becomes a nice tool that we can use moving forward. Namfundo, in terms of small scale farmers, you are so right, but it's not only the access to having proper water for irrigation. The challenge is also, and this is across the region, the high levels of sewage pollution in our rivers means that with the sewage, there's other bacteria, there's hepatitis, like you said, there's cholera, there's typhoid, that then that water is used for irrigation, and then it infects the food. So you have your water safety has a direct link to especially the small scale farmers. Commercial farmers, they put the pesticides and what's. But then small scale farmers, their food can be directly affected. So that's also a very big thing. And on a personal level, I think that you're right. 3 months of no water. Sure, there are lots of people that are going through that. And the one thing about water is that it has the real potential to bring together, to unite people under one struggle. So it doesn't matter middle class, it doesn't matter cultural background, racial background, country. It's the one thing that can unite us, or it can create very stark divisions. It's that kind of it's how we use it though. And I think that in terms of long-term solutions, I think we need to find ways of it uniting us and sharing the resource and looking after the resource, that it's not just for me, but it's for a bigger good, a wider good. And I think that's important. And you're right, we have to find better ways of dealing with our water and our water use. Like I said, we should not be flushing millions and billions of liters of good drinking water down the toilets. And we need to fix basic infrastructure so that we don't lose about 40% of our water in leaks. And Sunny, in terms of water testing, we did, so there's Rand Water, just so everyone knows, is your bulk water supplier. It's your water board. So they will abstract the water, they will clean it, and then they will sell it off to your different municipalities. They supply 5 provinces with water. And they have to test when they are at their source. When they are done cleaning it, they have to test the water to see that it's okay. That water is then sent to the municipalities, and that is where the problem starts. So Rand Water has been pretty good, but it's when it goes to the municipalities, and depending on the municipalities that it goes to, that's where the problems start getting bad. Having said that, the city of Joburg, I think your Joburg water is still safe to drink. We did conduct, in April, we did 20 different points that covers different reservoirs in the greater Johannesburg to test the water. It was all fine. So, but like I said, you have to continuously test. It might have been fine then. We don't know what happens down the line. So, Sunny, we need people like yourself to commit to saying, I will test my tap water every month. You know, that kind of thing, so that we know. and we can be alerted when because like I said to you, it's hard to just test now and say the water's fine, but 3 months down the line, we don't know. So I think you're right for now. I think the water's safe, but you are raising the right questions. I like your thinking. And I think that we need to all be doing that. We need to all be thinking about, we should test the water to make sure that it's okay to drink.
Cool. Thank you, Ferial, for those answers. I'm sure there's other questions bubbling up, but I'm going to ask participants to email any other questions or concerns to Ferial or myself, and we'll happily try and answer. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Zianda for the final session. It's going to be quite a short session, and then we'll close. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Courtney. Can I ask that you share the presentation on my behalf? So hi, everyone. As Courtney introduced me, I'm Zianda, the Comments Engagement Coordinator. And basically, this part of the session is just a moment to reflect everything that we have learned. I think quite a number of people have expressed their stresses of what's happening within their communities or within their homes when it comes to the issue of water. And it can be quite a stressful thing or issue to think about. So as I said, I'm Zianda, and I'll basically take you through what we at ACRP call the art reflection. And basically, this part of this workshop is basically taking a moment to regroup, take in what you have learned about the climate change, climate crisis, and water security. I'm not sure if you guys can hear anything happening in my background. It is quite a full house where I'm at, so apologies for that. As I was saying, we all may know how climate change is a massive issue and causes, a lot of despair and fear. And if not unpacked and reflected properly, it can be an issue. So from the information that you see, information that you read or learn about, it can get quite overwhelming, resulting in emotions being all over the place or towards issues such as, eco-anxiety. Therefore, this section will talk through various ways of processing information positively, being mindful of your feelings, and reflecting on your thoughts and emotions when it comes to the issue of the climate crisis. Also, part of it, climate change can also be, deeply emotional. Threats of life and historical inequality has led us to, being upset. Therefore, taking a moment to practice mindfulness can provide you with tools on how to, react in a healthy way. And one way of doing this, or being mindful of how you're feeling, is by sitting back and doing breathing exercises, or by connecting with nature, by taking a walk. This is just one of great methods to be aware of how you feel, both emotionally and physically. We can't be having activists, operating at an autopilot mode. So therefore, being mindful and taking a moment to get away and recognize what makes you feel, overwhelmed is important. There are also other ways of reflecting other than, breathing. We at ACRP call this, the art reflection. It forms part of storytelling. We believe that storytelling is just a great way to communicate and share people's lived experiences, clarifying your thinking and tuning in on what really matters to you. We find that sometimes expressing ourselves through spoken words can be quite difficult. And all we just want to do is to channel our experiences, feelings, and emotions in different forms. So this slide, even though it's just pictures, basically is showing those different ways, which are your illustrations, your paintings, your documentaries, journaling your feelings, song composing, or dances are just great methods or creative outlets that can assist in processing difficult and heavy information. Art is a great way to convey a message and bring about a sense of hope, love, and some form of optimism towards dealing with the climate crisis. So here at ACRP, in ways in which we've done the art reflection are in two ways, one being visual art and the other being written art. So the next couple of slides that I'll be showing, which is 4 slides, are some of the work that ACRP has done and climate leaders have done. So currently the slide that Courtney is showing is poetry. And poetry is just a great way to, provide comfort and boost your mood during periods of stress, trauma, or grief. It's a powerful combination of words and metaphors that can help us, better express ourselves and make sense of the world and our place in it. So the poetry that you see there, sorry, Courtney, if you can just take a step back. Last year, this formed as part of our Win Is Now campaign that we did last year, a collaboration between the Africa branch, Philippines branch, and Canada branch, which I'm happy to share more details about it in full in the email once we share the recording. We basically asked our climate leaders to, create poems based on biomes that they're part of or connect with. This includes poems on rainforest, grasslands, and savanna, just to name a few. And these poems were just ways of people expressing how they connect with the different biomes that are within the location or country that they're based in. These poems were then, taken and shared at COP27 as part of an exhibition that we did. But also these poetry has, inspired what we, call as visual arts, which were the murals in the next slide, Courtney. So various artists from different parts of, the world took the poems that were written on the Win Is Now page, but other climate leaders, and they basically interpreted these into murals, which is the visual part of, communicating issues that we're facing in the climate crisis. We do have one in South Africa, based in Kensington. Happy to share the address if you guys would love to see it or pass by if you're in the area. We also do have one that was created in Zambia. And the next slide are just other parts of the world in which murals were created based on the inspirations from the poems that were created. This is the Philippines and Canada. Just some of the, inspirations people received from what people had actually written out. So the next slide is the last example of, one other way of reflecting on an issue. And ACRP has done this through films. We have 2, which most of you do know, one being the Not on Our Soil, a Climate Justice Reality, which basically explores stories of active citizens who are advocating for the world we want or Africa we want. And lastly, the African Voices for Africa's Forests, which basically explores gender, indigenous rights, and restorations, in which our main character is a Cameroonian-based climate leader. She talks about nature-based solutions in the country and the work that she is doing in order to, deal with issues happening within her community. I'm also going to share the links to these films if you'd like to have a watch or would like to screen them, because as part of it, we do screen these films to communities just to get conversations going regarding issues being faced in different countries by different communities. That's about it for the art reflections, but what I'd like to encourage people to do is, to also just take a moment after dealing with so many issues of the world to, create your own sprouts of, creative climate action, whether it's through a painting, whether it's through poetry, whether it's through doing a mini film with your phone and your community and, briefing us on the issues that you're facing and the solutions that are being done. Is a great way of telling those stories and a great way for us to amplify those stories on your behalf where we can. So I do encourage you guys to take a moment to do this. It would be nice to get some of you guys' submissions. So yeah, that's, the art reflection section. It's taking a moment to take a breather, process the information, but also doing it in a very calm and creative way. So I'm going to pass it back to Courtney to take us on what's next.
Thank you so much, Zianda. I think it's such an important session. And it's so great that there's an outlet that people have. Often we feel unprepared or inequipped to make big decisions and come up with solutions. So thank you so much for giving us some kind of outlet. I'm going to hand over to Aurelie now to close. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Courtney. So this brings us to the end of our second installment of the African Voices Workshop series. Mine is just to thank you all who joined us on this call for participating and for engaging. A very big thank you to Dr. Ferial Adam for your invaluable insights. I'd like to encourage you all who are on this call to take everything that you've learned, everything we got from Courtney, from Dr. Ferial, Zianda's presentation, take it back into your communities and really encourage active citizenry. You're also very welcome to join our last session that's taking place on the 18th of August, and we'll be discussing waste management. But until then, you will receive a feedback form from us. Zianda will send you that in the course of the week. Please fill it out and send it back to us. It's very important that we hear from you in order to make a real impact with these workshops. We'll also send you all the slides from today's session, as well as the recording of this call. And for our climate leaders who attend all these workshops, as I indicated in the last workshop series, there is an opportunity for you to receive a grant from ACRP to run and implement an adaptation project in your own community. So this will be based on food or waste or water. Basically, you'll have an opportunity for that, but as previously said, it's for those of you who attend and participate in all of the workshops, who share an art reflection with us and send back those very important feedback forms as well. Then you'll get the details on how you can apply for this grant. And if you have any questions about this or around this, you can reach out to us through Zianda, Courtney, or myself. And for those of you who want to join our Climate Leader Network, we will be having an Africa training this year with our founder, former US Vice President Al Gore. It will be in West Africa later this year, and we will have more details on that on our website, so you can just register there to find out more information. But otherwise, that's it from me. Thank you once again to all of you for joining. Please feel free to turn your cameras on, unmute yourselves, and we can all say goodbye.
Actually, sorry, can I jump in before you guys actually pop off group pictures? Sorry, forgot to mention that. So as Lee asked, please switch on your camera so I can quickly take a picture. Just take a few seconds.
Everyone going to brush their hair.
I just tied my hair.
Sorry, can you guys hear me? I got kicked out for some reason.
Yeah, we've got you.
Sorry, thank you.
Because you said we're going to take pictures. There we go.
Thank you, that's it.
Awesome.
Is that done, Zee?
Yeah, I'm done.
You don't even tell us to smile. I mean.
You guys look
All
fine
right.
in the last one.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aurelie,
Bye, everyone.
Brenda, yes, thank you. Thank you so much. This was really insightful and very impactful. I mean, I wasn't able to make it. I learned quite a lot, and it'll be good to participate in the next and the last session.
Thank you so much,
well
Sunday.
done,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you,
Nice to see you all,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Hi, Sunny.